Hey, is there an App State brand? And when I say it, I'm talking whether it be a beer line or wine line. Is that something you guys can do, or because you're a university, that's not something you can do? Like, can you produce a beer and kind of sell it as a brand?
So no. The short answer to that question is no. We did actually get the state law changed so that we could do that. But for a number of reasons that I won't go into right now, maybe if we meet up in person some point over several beers, I can tell you the full story.
There you go.
Too long for this podcast. But for a number of reasons, we just didn't think that was the best route for us to go. So we use, industry partners to collaborate with, and that's where we use Ivory Tower. So that's kind of it's not the university brand. It's our private nonprofit. It's a 501c3, a tax exempt nonprofit, that we use to do those collaborations with industry folks. And that's how we generate revenue. And we certainly talk about the program on any of those labels, where Ivory Tower is part of the collaboration. The marketing or promotion certainly goes back to the university, but it is technically the nonprofit that does that. We are, however, working on getting our acidified foods permit so that we can sell fermented foods that we produce in-house, and also our wine and fortified wine licenses so that we can actually, and again, that's a long story, but it kind of makes sense for us now to be able to sell the wine that we produce in-house. And one of the reasons is, our probably closest collaborator, and we were continuing to grow that collaboration, was with Plebe Urban Winery down in Asheville. Unfortunately, they were in the River Arts District, and after Hurricane Helene, all that was left of their winery and any of our product that was down there, as well as, all of their product, was a sink. So their winery was completely washed away. And, that's one of the main reasons why it just makes sense for us, I think, more to do the wine in-house and be able to sell that, because that's once a year too, where we produce the wine. Whereas beer, if we were producing beer in-house for sale, that would be constant. And none of us has the bandwidth to be able to handle that currently. And the university is certainly not going to hire, a brewery manager for us at this time.
Right. Put a canning line or a bottling line or something.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
You don't need that.
Hey, Dr. Taubman, I'd love to talk to you more about craft beer, because we know the craft beer industry has changed so much over the years. How has that impacted you and what you do in your courses and your study since you started till now?
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, it really drove our enrollment for several years. And we've always focused on all things fermentation. We are all about traditional fermentation, not so much precision fermentation, which is more, using bioreactors, for example, using fermentation to make specific compounds that then can be input into other, like the non-dairy milk that still has all of the components of milk. You've got your casein, you've got your whey, but all of that is produced through fermentation rather than through a cow. So we've always focused on everything involving fermentation except for that, essentially, including food fermentations. But, as craft beer has sort of plateaued and now, has certainly decreased in popularity, young people are not drinking as much, and what they are drinking is more RTDs, less beer, things like that. So that has certainly impacted our enrollment, but now we're starting to see more interest in fermented foods. And so we're really trying to emphasize the fermented foods portion of our program as well, because that's where we really see the growth in fermentation in the future.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where I was going too. So as you talk about there, it's kind of impacted how you're taking your program to keep up with the evolution of the changes.
Absolutely. I mean, fermentation is one of the hottest fields out there right now. And we're just scratching the surface of understanding how important fermented foods are for our health and in general, how important the gut microbiome is to our overall health. As we continue to learn more about all of those sort of related fields to fermentation, I think that will only drive the growth and interest in fermentation in general.
Stephen, what's your perspective in, being in the program for 4 years and you're in the inside, you're doing the studying, you're doing the coursework, and all of a sudden you're looking on the outside and you're like, look how everything is just changing in the craft beer industry. Has that swayed you in any way, shape, or form of your thinking?
Somewhat. Definitely, watching some of the energy behind the craft beer industry kind of slow down a little bit has definitely, helps to kind of, prompt some other questions about, what else can I do with fermentation science? But I will say the primary thing that kind of, attracted me away from just brewing and doing other things was just, learning about all the other things you can do. That wasn't something I was super aware of when I came to the program. I knew a little bit about, basic principles of fermentation and obviously about beer production, but there's just so much out there, like Dr. Taubman was just saying, and I think that was kind of the primary thing that got me to start looking at some other options. I definitely think that as far as the craft beer industry at large goes, I think there's some restructuring that's happening, and I think that things are going to keep changing a little bit, but I think that on the other side, we're going to continue to just get even more innovative beer out of it. And at the end of the day, I think it's just going to force brewers to be even more creative. And, I'm looking forward to it. Obviously it's a tragedy when your favorite brewery closes and, or you can't buy their beer because they don't distribute to your area anymore. But, I do think there are, silver linings to the kind of, direction that craft beer is going in.
Cider has really become a really big deal now for breweries.
Definitely, yeah. Cider and seltzers are kind of, I don't know how much sticking power they have, but that was definitely another option to have for brewers to use their equipment and do some other cool stuff. But I definitely think that one of the coolest things that I think breweries could do is kind of just diversify their products in general. I know that the way that the alcohol laws are written can make it difficult for breweries to do wines and ciders if they don't have those permits, but they feasibly could get those permits, and it works differently state to state. But I think it'd be really cool to either be an employee of or a patron of a brewery that was doing beer but also cider and wine and, I don't know, vinegar, why not, and just all these other fermented products, and just kind of turn your outfit into kind of just a fermented beverages outfit in general. I think that would be a really cool way for some brewers to go, but there remains to be seen how productive or successful they'll be.
Yeah, and I think that is, a lot of brewers, the more innovative ones have certainly been the ones who are weathering the storm better than the ones who, have just stuck to their guns and said, well, we're going to try and ride it out. On what Stephen was talking about with innovation, I think one of the interesting things that has come out of sort of the decline in drinking, alcohol consumption is the low and no alcohol beers. And the brewers may not agree with me on this, but I think it's one of the cooler things that has come out of recent years in the brewing industry from a purely sort of fermentation science perspective, because the techniques that we're using now to make low and no alcohol beers are far more interesting than the techniques that have been used in the past. And we're using a lot of those novel yeast strains and other novel sorts of microbes to ferment these low and no alcohol beers. And I think that could really drive more innovation using those novel microbes.
That's got to be at least, because there's another way too. Don't they, brewers sometimes make it with alcohol in it and then have to somehow get rid of the alcohol after they brewed it? So It's got to be a less expensive way to do it the way you just described.
Oh, 100%. Because there's kind of been an evolution in how non-alcoholic beers have been produced. The first is just using, distillation, vacuum distillation. So you make a regular beer, you vacuum distill it, and, remove all the alcohol, but you also, are boiling it then. You get a lot of off flavors, oxidation. Those beers were not very good. Those were the early non-alcoholic beers. Then reverse osmosis came along where you can use an RO system to essentially strip everything out of a beer and then add back in what you want or don't want. And so, you can use that RO system to strip alcohol out of beer. And so you get pretty normal tasting beers just without the alcohol. The problem is it requires a huge capital outlay and a lot of technical expertise to use that RO system. The most recent sort of innovation in non-alcoholic or low alcohol brewing is, you're adjusting the mash procedure, using a much, decreased grain bill. So you're using a lot less grains in general. So that's where you're saving a lot of money. And then you're actually, using novel sorts of yeast strains or genetically modified yeast strains that are maltose negative, maltose being the primary sugar in an all malt wort. So if these yeasts are maltose negative and there's mostly maltose as the fermentable sugar, well, normally fermentable sugar to most Saccharomyces strains, then these yeasts can't ferment that. So you still have fermentation, but not, you're not producing a lot of sugar in the first place. And what is produced, is not converted to ethanol. It may be converted some to organic acid. So you still get that fermentation character in the beer, but with very little to no alcohol. So it's really a cool process. You can use standard brewing equipment, the standard methods. You just have to alter your mashing protocol a little bit, but it doesn't take any more time. And it's a real cost saving because you really, you're talking like, 6-7 Plato, as like you're starting your original gravity. So that's like 1020, 1028 in gravity that you're talking about for. So, very little grain is being used. So you really can produce them on the cheap. And at the same time, you can sell them for the same price as an alcoholic beer. The problem is there's a lot of concern about the safety of those products. However, the most recent research and really the best research to date is showing that a lot of those safety concerns were somewhat overblown. I'm not saying everybody should just go and throw these non-alcoholic beers on tap and pretend that it's a normal beer, because you certainly do need to be a lot more conscientious about the safety of these beers, because guess what? Alcohol is probably the main antimicrobial component in beer. When you have percents of alcohol in a beer, that is very antimicrobial. If you remove that, certainly some microbes, pathogenic microbes, can get in there potentially. But with the pH of, even a non-alcoholic beer, and when it's carbonated, you're in a pressurized container, it really looks like a lot of those safety concerns were at least somewhat overblown.
Okay. Yeah, I'll go back to what you said about charging the same price. When I look at a menu and the non-alcoholic beer is still $7, I'm like, why?
Yeah, what's going on?
I know, but people they'll pay for that.
They will. It's just they're just offsetting drinking up the alcohol, I guess. But
Yep.
Dr. Taubman, you've got a quote in your auto signature in your email, and it says fermentation equals civilization. And I know fermentation goes back to basically the start of civilization, right? Can you kind of talk about, and I was trying to avoid this question because I heard you answer this question, but you know what's coming. What is fermentation? I know it's not an easy answer. And why is it important?
It is not an easy answer. And that's, so I have a new book coming out, in May.
I bought it.
Southern Culture on the Fizz.
Yep.
Great.
Bought it.
Got to give that shameless plug for my book. But, that's what I talk about in the introduction of that book, is that, you would think that as a fermentation scientist, I should be able to answer that question easily, but there really is no straightforward answer to the question of what is fermentation. There is a lot of disagreement as to what actually entails fermentation. So a lot of people say that it's anaerobic, although there are certainly aerobic fermentation processes as well. Talk to any filamentous fungi, mold, they'll tell you that it's certainly aerobic. Acetic acid bacteria, also aerobic. So it's usually anaerobic, can be aerobic. It usually involves microbes, although a lot of people argue, well, it's the enzymes that are actually doing the work. So the microbes produce the enzymes that actually catalyze those reactions. So you could actually have cell-free fermentation reactions with just the enzymes. But, if I were to really define it, you are changing the compounds, these biomolecules, primarily proteins, carbohydrates, and some lipids. So the main biomolecules found in foods, you're using microbes usually to convert those to other compounds. And in the case of fermented foods and beverages, they're compounds that are, often more nutritious, more easily digestible by us, and often a lot more flavorful as well. So there's your roundabout answer.
Well, when give the name of the book, because it's pretty creative.
Yeah, Southern Culture on the Fizz, and then it's got the subtitle, An Effervescent Guide to Fermented Foods and Beverages from the American South. So the name I used Southern Culture on the Skids, the indie rock band out of Chapel Hill. I'm actually going to see them next Thursday in Boone.
Nice.
And we'll tell them about my book and how their name was the inspiration for the title of my book. Hopefully they don't sue me and they're actually just happy about it.
Well, the main reason I jumped on getting the book when I heard you talk about it was the food part. And of course we live in the South, all of us do here. And it was like, that's really fascinating how you talked about, this is the only part of the country that really has its own food culture, kind of original food culture. And then I think you have recipes and things in there. And then you kind of talk about what some of those fermented foods are too, that we might not even know what some fermented foods are.
Absolutely.
So it sounded really interesting. So I'm going to get it. I'm going to try some of these recipes and just read it. It sounds interesting. Yeah.
How long did it take you to put this book together?
So, I mean, from start to finish, a few years. As far as the main writing time, I took a sabbatical in the spring of 23 so that I could work on the manuscript. And, I had maybe a couple chapters written at that point, but really not much of it written. And it was due that fall, really by the end of the summer. So I had quite a bit to do on it. And I got, 90% of the writing done in that 8-month period, 6 to 8 month period. But then, beyond that, and I look at people who self-publish books, and I kind of look at them with envy at this point. UNC Press, who published this book, they have been fabulous to work with. I could not be happier with the publisher and with the editors that I've worked with. They've been amazing. But the amount of work that goes into publishing a book, once the manuscript is written, I had no idea. This is my first full-length book, so I had no idea what it entailed. And I mean, it's been it's been a year and a half since I turned that manuscript, the full manuscript, in to the point of when it's getting published.
Wow. And that comes out in May, this May?
May 13, but it's available for pre-order already on the UNC Press site and Amazon as well.
And so can you give kind of people a bit of a sneak preview of what they're going to be able to read in this book for people that are interested?
Sure. Yeah. So like Scott was talking about, one of my arguments in the book is that Southern culinary culture is the only truly unique culinary culture in the country. And it is the only truly American culinary culture in the country as well. And that's for a number of reasons, climatic reasons, political reasons, all of the different cultures that were either, forced to be in the South or chose to be in the South at the time, all just kind of blended to, create this Southern culinary culture that is truly unique. And how fermentation played a role in that, because prior to refrigeration, fermentation was our main way of food preservation. And so, if you were to preserve food and survive through the winter, throughout, after the growing seasons, you had to use fermentation. And so we got a lot of really unique fermentations from this unique culinary culture in the South as well. And I also argue that, as my email signature says, fermentation is really the reason why we are a civilized society in the first place, why we are, and probably why we're modern humans as well. For the longest time, we're trying to say that it was fire that, gave us the nutrients and was able, and this is, interesting as well, because the similarity to cooking food and fermenting foods, you're accomplishing a lot of the same things. When you cook food, you break down those biomolecules to make them more accessible to our gastrointestinal system. And as modern humans, our gastrointestinal system, our guts shrank by a third from our early hominid days as our brains grew by a factor of 3. And so the argument was, well, it was fire that allowed us to do that because it gave us access to, the calories and the nutrients that we needed to be able to grow our brains. And the fire was breaking down those foods to a degree that we could shrink our guts, and the energy that we saved from shrinking our guts could go to growing our brains. But there was always kind of the question, well, how did we figure out how to tame fire in the first place if our very intelligent primate cousins, great apes, chimps, bonobos, haven't figured that out yet? I mean, a lot of them use tools already, but they haven't mastered fire. So how did we figure that out? There's a new hypothesis that was published just last year, the external fermentation hypothesis, that is filling in that gap and says that it was actually fermentation and the fact that, ever since hominids have been collecting and storing food, it has been naturally fermenting. And that fermentation process does the same thing that fire does by degrading those biomolecules, making them more nutritionally accessible to us. And so that, not fire, was what allowed us to shrink our guts and grow our brains so that then we could master fire and do that even more. So fermentation could be the very reason that we are modern humans in the first place. And I 100% believe that it is the reason for modern civilization, not bread. The whole Fertile Crescent bread thing, that's all whitewashed archaeological history. It was really beer that they were making.
It was beer first, right? Yep.
Absolutely. And they were using that, the bread that wasn't really for eating. It was kind of a flatbread that was inoculated naturally with yeast, Bapper, that it was called. And they were using that as the inoculum to inoculate those unmalted grains in their beer gruels back in the day.
And it's funny that they knew there was a process, but they didn't know what that process necessarily, like they didn't know there were molecules and things and microbes and stuff until modern day almost, right? What was happening.
Until the late 19th century, we had no idea what microbes were. I mean, people had been, viewing them through microscopes since the 17th century. but didn't understand that they were actually living organisms. They thought they were like chemical catalysts that were involved in these reactions. And, Pasteur was laughed out of many scientific conferences before he could finally prove that these tiny little cells were actually individual living microbes, individual living organisms. So yeah, we had no idea what even microbes were until the late 19th century. But we've been brewing beer and fermenting foods and doing all these other, fermentation activities for thousands of years.
Yeah, this conversation reminds me. There's a series out there. I don't know if it's on the History Channel or which one it is, but I love to watch it. The Food That Built America, and it kind of reminds me of this. Like the evolution of everything. Of you think back, it wasn't that long ago that things were done where you're going, oh my gosh, how did we get that far, right?
Absolutely. If you look at modern day brewing, it really isn't that different from the earliest days of brewing. There's just more stainless steel and automation at this point.
Yeah. Yeah.
And pumps, thank goodness,
If I were to make, you guys have a research facility. I think we touched on it earlier. And I think if I saw companies or breweries or wineries or whatever can send in samples to kind of evaluate what that is when they do that, is it, hey, what's gone wrong with this? Or did you just kind of get an evaluation of what the makeup is? How does that work?
For breweries, that is typically the case. Hey,
what happened?
we think something went wrong with this batch. Can you help us identify what it is?
Yeah.
And normally it's a microbial issue. But with like wine, for example, and other industries, they're required, and brewing too. Like, you actually don't have to put the alcohol on the label, but that probably will be required in the next couple of years. But all of them still do. And, if they put it on there and it's not within, I think, 0.5% one way or the other, they can get cited for that. And this is outside my wheelhouse, so I'm probably misspeaking, and I apologize to all the alcohol lawyers out there. But I'm a scientist. With wine, there are certain things that they need to verify, not only alcohol, but like sulfur content, volatile acidity, things like that. So other industries have more standard analyses. Brewing, it's usually like, oh, shoot, this, batch went wrong. Can you help us figure out what it was? Kombucha, for example, it's a non-alcoholic beverage usually. And so they send those samples to us to make sure that it is in fact non-alcoholic. And is not above 0.5% alcohol by volume, because then they would be in violation. So it depends on the industry, but a lot of the times it is because things went wrong and they're trying to figure out why.
Okay. Hey, Stephen, if and part of that same conversation with the research lab, if I made a beer here and I'm planning on making a Skyline chili beer, because Steve's a big Skyline chili guy. So I've got a recipe kind of worked up. I haven't made it yet, but with you not knowing that, if I sent you that beer, could you reverse engineer it and kind of see what's in it? Kind of, obviously there's certain ingredients, right? But could you reverse engineer it, and not by drinking it necessarily, but maybe with the research lab and some of the equipment that you have, could you reverse engineer a beer?
I'm sure that there are ways to do that. But honestly, the first place that I would go to reverse engineer a beer is just to drink it, just to see what, what notes I can and draw on my, knowledge of malts and stuff.
I think he's going to try to make me the guinea pig.
Oh yeah. I'm sure at least for, for like capsaicin, for the spice compound that's in the actual peppers, I know there are assays where you can, determine how much, like the Scoville, scale for stuff like that. Yeah. And I'm sure that there's other ways to, kind of determine, quantities of different volatile compounds and stuff like that. But, the first place I would start is just to dig in and be like, how much roasted barley is in here, if any, versus, like maybe there's a smoked malt in there or something like that. Pull out the ones that are really, easy to determine and to kind of work backwards. But it could be surprisingly difficult. I mean, tasting beer is one of those things where it's so subjective, and, it can change, depending on the setting and, all of this stuff. So, some of the coolest, exercises that we did at the brewery and in the program, were like blind tastings, where we would try to, do like a triangle test where we're trying to pull off like, okay, two of these are the same thing and one of them's, a different beer. And I've done triangle tests of beers that I made and still can't get it right every single time, versus either it's a commercial beer or another, a different batch or a different product even that's on tap. And it's like, without all the guides, like color and, seeing what tap handle it came out of, it's really hard to tell sometimes what you're actually tasting. So that's a good experience that I would recommend to any beer makers out there, is to do a true, blind tasting, like put on a blindfold and like taste that beer and really try to guess what it is, pull out all the flavor notes. It's surprisingly difficult.
It's hard. Steve and I did a podcast and we were drinking some good beer, but then within the podcast we picked out 4 crappy beers. And I go back and like a Bud Ice and along those lines. And we got them served to us blindly, and we knew they were all crap, but we still couldn't pick out the crappiest one. We figured one was the crappiest, and it wasn't that one, the one we liked the best. It was just a blind will throw you off completely.
But I still have that aftertaste of the Bud Ice, though, after all these ones. It's like I can still taste it, like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, I mean, none were good. Because I know we're wanting to go ahead.
I was going to say, not defending Bud Ice necessarily, but don't look down your nose at a lot of macro lagers, because man, a lot of them are really good beers.
Well, I was about to touch on that a little bit, that we have talked about the lagers over time, over the past year or so, that we have seen a real shift, that lagers are becoming a lot better.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think a lot more craft breweries are making a lot more lagers, which, it's understandable that they avoided them for a very long time, because it takes longer to produce lagers than it does ales. But with modern yeast strains and techniques, brewers can crank out a lager in almost the same amount of time as they can an ale. So I think that's, a big part of the reason for the rise in lagers, which I'm super happy about, because I love a good crisp lager.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's nothing better on a warm day.
Right. And I've gotten much more of an appreciation, probably because they've gotten better in the last 3 or 4 years too. I see one and I'm like, yes, I can really truly appreciate the simpleness of it.
Yeah, it drove me crazy, when you'd go into a craft brewery like 10 years ago or more, and you'd order a Pilsner and it would come back just hazy as all get out. And you'd be like, this is the Pilsner? And the server would be like, yeah, we don't filter our beers here. And it'd be like, I don't care. That's not a Pilsner. That's not what it should look like. It's nothing to do with filtering.
That is something I wondered about as we started this podcast, of like, from both of you that are really into the science and the chemistry of it all. If you ever just walk into a brewery and you're tasting beer and it kind of drives you crazy at times, because, you're doing it every day,
A lot of the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I mean, you identify the off flavors. You're like, I know exactly what's wrong with that beer.
Mm-hmm.
And it really does. It kind of turns you off, to certain beers or certain breweries even.
Yeah. I feel like I know too much now. Since when I started at the program, honestly,
the curtain has been drawn back.
Yeah, it's like I go in and I'm like, well, I can taste exactly what happened here. And honestly, I'm drinking less beer than when I did at the start of the program, just because,
really,
I'm, tastes are changing and I'm into other stuff, and also just when I want to drink a beer, I want to drink a really good one. So I'm drinking a lot less bad beer, I guess, is the primary thing.
Yeah. With that being said, do you tend to maybe go more cans and bottles because that's probably more consistent, or can you find off flavors in those too?
when I'm out, usually if I'm at a craft brewery, I'll get stuff on tap. I mean, most craft breweries, that's the only option anyway. But when I'm at a bar, I will usually try to get something in a package, unless I, know and trust that bar. But I have been burned multiple times just based on tap lines alone, where I get something that I know what it should taste like, and it comes back, and I'm like, yeah, that's buttery. That I can taste the inside of your tap line, and it's not a pleasant experience. So, luckily, I have not been to. I'm sure those bars exist in Boone, but luckily I have not had to go to one of those places in Boone, and we've got some good, clean tap lines in this town for the most part.
Now that Murphy's is closed down.
I guarantee you we've got plenty of those bars in downtown Nashville.
Oh yeah, I bet.
I wouldn't doubt it. You have a lot more bars than we do in Boone.
But not the good ones. Just the ones that just just for the tourists. They don't care. They don't care what it tastes like.
Yeah. Hey, speaking of Nashville, I'm actually coming there over the summer for the men's national team game.
Okay.
Are you?
Yeah, June. When is it? June
early
something. June? Yeah, something like that. But I'll be in town then. I'll definitely hit you guys up and see if you're around.
Yeah, hit us up.
That'd be great.
Germany. Yeah, I'm in Germany sometime early June. Let's see what those dates are and see. We'd love to hook up and have some beers.
June 10 maybe, something like that. I just bought tickets. You'd think I would know, but
we could take you to a brewery and I'll order what you order. So I feel like I'm getting the good stuff.
Well, order it after I try it. And
there you go.
That's it.
There you go.
Have him get a flight, Steve, and then he just picks the one. Oh, that was the better of the four.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Hey, I know we let you go, but one thing, and we just touched on you guys have a pot still, and one of my other favorite loves is whiskey, and you guys obviously distill because fermentation happens in the mash, and after you make the mash and all that stuff. So, is that a big part of what you guys do? Do you get to distill whiskey? What do you get to drink it? I'm giddy about it.
Yeah, and that's that's my drink of choice. If I'm drinking alcohol, it's whiskey most of the time, not even beer. But yeah, we teach distillation technology every fall. We have a 400-liter, like I was saying, that hybrid pot column still, kind of a funky design, but works great. And that's from Deutsche Beverage out of Charlotte. So that was kind of their prototype design when they were getting into distillation. And then we also have an Italian Frilly. That's kind of a classic alembic pot still. That's a 100-liter still. So, we usually get students started on the smaller still, and then, they kind of graduate to the larger still. But that's a lot of distillate to produce with that larger still. So we definitely use that on a limited basis.
My favorite thing that the big still gets used for is just recycling. Like if we've got a bunch of kegs of student projects that are been sitting in the walk-in for a long time, just need to we get rid of them. We'll throw them all into the still, run it down to as pure as we can get it, and then put it in spray bottles and use it for sanitizing. So
there you go.
You made the ethanol. Why dump it down the drain? That's still good stuff.
That's exactly right. Yeah, you saw a lot of that during COVID, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, funny story about COVID too. So with that 400-liter still, we got that with a federal grant, like I was saying, and that was back in 2016. But our administration was a little squeamish about us using that large of a still to produce ethanol. And, they're like, well, we think, you should get, the license for that. We're like, great. Well, can you help us with this? And, typical general counsel's office at a university dragging their feet on anything that, is not an absolute priority. And then the pandemic hit. And before we realized that it was an airborne disease, an airborne virus, everybody was bathing in hand sanitizer. And so the university bought up as much hand sanitizer as they could and then couldn't source anymore. So they were freaking out. And I was like, we can make it for the university. And they're like, great, what do we need to do? I'm like, here's the license we need. And so like that, we got our TTB experimental distilled spirits production license. So we can distill as much as we want, as long as it never leaves the premises.
Okay.
Nice.
All right. I saw some pictures, and you got barrels in a storage room or something. Is that for the whiskey, or do you use that for other things too? You putting whiskey?
We've used barrels for a number of things. I mean, we generally use small barrels because we're not making 55 gallons plus of distillate at a time typically. So we'll use smaller barrels for aging. Sometimes the barrels that we do have, we'll use for, doing some funky beers, things like that. We even used one time for making a fish garum, so a fish sauce.
Oh, wow.
But then none of us was brave enough to actually try it. It's an alkaline ferment, so like the pH is not in a safe range, and there's barrels sitting outside. Like it was, it was not something I wanted to put into my body, but we definitely need to try that again.
Yeah.
Well, I've got one more, and along those lines of distilling. Do you ever get, because you're in the mountains of North Carolina, do you ever get any moonshiners that reach out to you guys and say, "Hey, what's wrong with this moonshine?" or anything like that?
We've never been sought after for advice from moonshiners.
No,
we have had moonshiners that have come in and spoken to some of our classes.
Really?
To give them a little primer on the history and the techniques they use and things like that. So that's pretty cool. And we actually have an old moonshiner still that belonged to the Appalachian Heritage Museum that was on campus for a number of years, and it was grant funded. And after they, their grant funding ran out, they just kind of, donated all their stuff, and they came to us and said, "Hey, do you guys want this, moonshiner still?" And we were like, "Sure." So it's just sitting in our facility now as kind of a showpiece.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah.
Those are always cool to look at. Absolutely. A little history there.
Definitely.
We get a little moonshine in the hills of Tennessee too. So
Oh yeah.
Well, guys, I know, Steve, I know we've kept you guys long enough. Did you have anything you wanted to add here at the end?
Just to wrap up, I know, we had talked about this on a podcast a few months ago. Hurricane Helene impacted a lot of different areas. And you guys in Boone, we know that it was impactful there too. How are things going since that time for you all?
Things are much better in Boone, and Boone definitely got hit hard, but not nearly as hard as areas like Asheville.
Yeah.
And, just south and southwest of us, they really got hammered. And a lot of folks went out of business as a result of Helene down in that area. So it's going to take them years to really recover from that. And if anybody is interested in donating, because, that's what happens in these sort of emergency situations is like, it's an emergency and everybody sort of donates for the first couple months, and then it kind of fades out of the news stories and people just forget about it. But, meanwhile, the people in those areas are still struggling. So if you would like to donate, I would recommend going to the North Carolina Brewers Guild.
Yeah.
So that's drinkncbeer.org. And then you can find at NC Beer Helene Relief in the North Carolina Brewers Guild. They have a page set up where you can donate directly to Western North Carolina breweries. So if that's something you're interested in helping out with, please do, because a lot of these businesses are still struggling. It's already such a struggle these days for these businesses. And after an event like that, it's almost a death, death for a lot of these businesses. So please help them out if you can.
Yeah, we've tried to talk about it a little bit on the podcast since that time because, it is concerning, and we didn't want to bring you guys on today, happen in your backyard and not highlight it a little bit.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yep.
And Asheville is one of the best beer cities on the planet. I've been many times, and just the beer there.
Absolutely.
It's wonderful, and just want to see that place do well and come back.
Yeah. I actually have my Beer City Cup T-shirt on. From the
nice.
It's a big adult soccer tournament down in Asheville, Beer City.
Nice.
There you go.
So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much for being here. I know you got busy schedules and we kept you late, but thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having us on.
You bet. Yeah,
Yep,
thanks so much.
Been a great learning experience. All right. Well, I'm sure we'll catch you down the road. For now, thank you very much from the Brewery Underground Podcast.
Thanks, gentlemen.
All right.
Thank you.
Cheers, fellas. Cheers.